So I just watched all of Natalia Speaks, the second season of Strange Case of Natalia Grace. It's a very perplexing story that raises issues about identity, challenges with adoptions, and parenting in general, as well as a lot of mental health issues that I want to cover here. So to give a rundown, Natalia is a Ukrainian orphan adopted by the Barnett family in 2009. Natalia has a very rare form of dwarfism with an impossibly long name. I'm not going to try and say it, but it's basically left her crippled. She has severe contractures in her legs. She doesn't have full use of her hands, doesn't have a good pincer grip. She has clubbed feet. She has to walk on tiptoes to get around. The Barnetts say that they soon started to observe strange behavior from Natalia. They said that she was malignant, destructive, would do things to upset their biological children, that she would leave toys and things around for them people to step on. They say she displayed adult-like tendencies, such as advanced vocabulary and knowledge beyond her years. The Barnett's assertion is that Natalia is not a child, but rather an adult sociopath masquerading as a child. They said the first night they brought her home that they observed full pubic hair on her when they tried to give her a bath. Also at this time, Christine Barnett, the adoptive mother, gets a book deal to write about her autistic son Jacob. Jacob's autism was considered so severe that many thought he would require lifelong care and support. And the spark is all about how, because of Christine, he became a prodigy in math and physics. The Barnetts embark on a whirlwind media tour, and they even go on 60 Minutes. A lot of these interviews, Christine talks about her talents as a mother and a nurturer. While these interviews are taking place, Natalia has been pretty much abandoned, dropped off in an apartment to live by herself. Also, during this time, the Barnetts relocate to Canada so that Jacob could attend college there. He was about 14, so the family relocates to support Jacob. So he's a minor, he can't live on his own, but Natalia is on her own. In 2012, the Barnetts claim an incident at I think it was a horse farm or outdoors somewhere, an incident where Natalia tried to pull Christine into an electric fence. Even though the proprietor said the electric fence wasn't on, there was no danger, they still use this as an excuse to put Natalia in a mental hospital. And while she was there, they went to the courts and presented a judge with what they deemed evidence that Natalia was actually older than she said. They re-aged her birth year from 2003 to 1989. The re-aging sparks a controversy, which eventually leads to criminal charges of the Barnetts in 2019. Immediately after, the Barnetts are charged with neglect. They basically turn on each other. Their marriage implodes, they divorce, they accuse each other of all sorts of horrible things. So I want to talk now about the series itself and just kind of some of the impressions that I had while watching it. I thought it was odd how little analysis is given on this case, like not one mental health professional is interviewed in the whole series. I will say the series is a bit trashy or has poor taste in how sensational it is. There's a hot mic moment where Jacob Barnett talks about kicking Natalia down the stairs as if not realizing he's being recorded. Both seasons end on cliffhangers. The first season largely gives Michael Barnett the adoptive father side. Michael starts off talking about their family life before Natalia. He paints a picture of wealth and success. He talks about how many cars they have, possessions, how much money in the bank account. After some digging, I found out that most of this money actually came later after Natalia's adoption from his wife's book deal. Michael himself made a modest living in retail. He then says that he lost everything, his job, money, family, and points all the blame to Natalia. He then goes into many stories about Natalia's destructive behavior. Michael Barnett tells his story with such vehemence that you kind of think there is something there. The first season is kind of meant to make you think that maybe Natalia is a sociopath or a monster, con artist, whatever, because that's the sensational element. I'm watching the videos of Natalia, who clearly looks like a child, and trying to figure out, how, could this actually be a 30-year-old woman? They try really hard to lend credibility to Michael's story, which must have been really hard because Michael is not very credible. He's very dramatic. He seems very emotionally dysregulated. He uses a lot of hyperboles. He floods you with information, tells you a lot of things you really don't need to know, throws a lot of shade, tries to hurt his wife emotionally, constantly. A lot of the behaviors and incidents described concerning Natalia really only sound deviant or malignant in the context of them being perpetrated by an adult. I don't think anyone would bat an eye at the thought of a child throwing tantrums or leaving things around, even walking around with a knife in their hand, or touching another child or hanging around at people's doorsteps. It just doesn't sound that malicious. One thing that does sort of lend credibility to Michael are interviews with other people and about their interactions with Natalia. There's a whole episode about neighbors, when she lived in the Westfield and Lafayette apartments, and they mostly just say that they were uncomfortable around her. They said that she smelled, had very strong body odor, that she would just kind of hang around, loiter around the apartments, wait on their doorsteps, wait for them to come home, that she would want to be let into their house and want to spend time with them and kind of harass them, how they put it. So watching this, I'm kind of waiting for something really dramatic, something concrete that points in the direction that she really is this dangerous predator or whatever. Like she hurts somebody, stabs somebody, but it just never comes. The only incident where someone could have gotten hurt was the electric fence incident. And it's a little hard to take it seriously considering that Natalia weighed about 35, 37 pounds at the time and is severely disabled. I think the worst of these stories came from this craggy old neighbor lady named Sue, who says that Natalia tried to feel up her grandson. I think the only thing they really cover in depth as far as evidence as to how old Natalia is in the first season is they track down her biological birth mother in the Ukraine. She was born in the late 70s, 1978, 1979. So she wasn't born in 1989 like the Barnetts try to say she is. So the first season, we get the Barnett side, and now second season, Natalia Speaks, we're getting Natalia's side. The second season starts right off the bat, kind of clearing the air about Natalia's age. They go over medical tests that were done, bone density tests. They interview a dentist that did a exam at Natalia when she was living with the Barnetts, and she still had a lot of her baby teeth. And they also did a DNA test that actually suggests that Natalia actually is a few years older than she said. So instead of being born in 2003, she's actually born around 2000, 2001. Still very much a child when she was living with the Barnetts. So it's possible that the orphanage in the Ukraine just fudged her date a few years to make her maybe in a more attractive buy for adopting couples. What's weird is that Christine, the adoptive mother, is the one who ordered the dental tests on Natalia to see if, how old she was. And she claims this is because she believed she was really an adult con artist. And so it does kind of make me wonder, not to give any credibility to the Barnetts, but if she really was like 9 or 10 instead of 7, that maybe that is partly why they began to suspect something was up. They claim that she had a period, which it's, I don't know whether she had a period or not, obviously, but it's not impossible, especially if she was 9 or 10. There's studies out there that say you can have a period very early, especially if you have medical issues or were exposed to trauma as a child. I don't think her age was really the factor in terms of how or why she was treated by the Barnetts like she was, and I'll get into that in a minute. Natalia ends up living in the apartments in Westfield and Lafayette for about 2 years entirely on her own until she meets a family called the Manns who take her in. And it takes about 7 years from 2012 all the way until 2019 before a social services investigation gets underway. Almost immediately, the investigation picks up steam, and the Barnetts are charged with neglect. They're not charged with child neglect because Natalia was legally an adult. They were charged with neglect of a dependent or disabled person because of how disabled Natalia was. Natalia gives an account of the abuse that she endured in the Barnett home. She talks about beatings. She talks about being pepper sprayed. Jacob, the oldest son, even admits in the first season to urinating in her bed. She also accuses Christine of deliberately trying to overdose her. She talks about things Christine would do to control her, mind games. She talks about a time when she made Natalia insert a tampon as a way of proving to her that she had a period. Natalia gives some textbook examples of gaslighting by Christine, and believe me, I'm sick of hearing about gaslighting. Most of the time when I hear people talk about it, they're really talking about a misunderstanding, someone remembered something wrong and they're just trying to convince the other. That's not what gaslighting is. Natalia talks about challenges she faced while living in the Westfield and Lafayette apartments. At least, I think in Lafayette, she had to go up at least 20 steps. And you have to keep in mind, she's very disabled. She has to walk on tiptoes because of her club feet and contractures. In his interview, Michael Barnett talks about these apartments like they're in a really great neighborhood, like perfect for Natalia. All the other accounts say that it's in a dangerous part of town, the other side of the tracks. It's interesting that Michael seems to think that this actually is appropriate for Natalia. He has a certain standard of living for himself and his family, living in a nice house, having the best of everything. But he deems this as perfectly acceptable for Natalia, as if there's a hierarchy and she's not on the same level as the Barnetts. She's not able to do things that you and I take for granted, like go to the grocery store. The stove in her apartment, she can't reach the burners without burning herself. The bathtub in her apartment had those clawfoot. It was, one of those old school clawfoot tubs. It's really high. Like, I don't even want to get into one of those. Probably the saddest thing listening to her, and I even thought this in the first season, was just how lonely she must have felt. Those neighbors are complaining about her wanting to be around them, and she doesn't have anybody. The Barnetts are all the way in Canada. The neighbors are complaining about her smell, and it's because she can't bathe. She can't take care of herself. It's sad to hear the neighbors talk about her like she's a nuisance. They all affirm that they believe she was an adult. It's not always clear to tell whether someone is really in need of help or you can do anything about it, but I think it was simply more convenient for these neighbors to choose to believe she was an adult and not their problem. Probably the biggest mystery to me about this case is just how the Barnetts were able to convince so many people that Natalia was really an adult. And they were able to convince a judge, so you'd think there must be something to it. And really all they had to present was a letter from their primary physician. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about what I think is going on here, some things that stood out to me in this case. And there's a really good example of the scapegoating. I think Natalia became the perfect family scapegoat for the Barnetts. In a dysfunctional family dynamic, the scapegoat is the one who carries the blame, shame, and frustration for the entire family. The scapegoat is often someone more sensitive or outspoken than the other family members. I think because of Natalia's issues and not going along with Christine's plan to make her into a poster child, she became seen as a threat to the family's equilibrium. The thing about the scapegoat is they're never the sole source of the family's problems. They're simply a convenient target for the family to project their issues onto. The Barnetts really want you to think that Natalia is this problem child and the cause of all their grief, all their problems. Really, Natalia is a reflection of the dysfunction in this family. She's a reflection of the Barnetts' need for self-aggrandizement. She's evidence that Christine is not the super mom, not able to give a severely disabled and probably psychologically damaged child the help she needs on her own. I don't think it's a far stretch to say that some cluster B disorder is going on here. Narcissists are only capable of viewing situations and problems in terms of how it affects them. For example, Natalia needed a lot of medical care. She needed orthopedic shoes. She needed multiple surgeries. And she received far less than what she should have in the Barnett home, despite the Barnetts' ability to afford this care. In the first season, Christine's son Jacob is interviewed, and he claims that all the proceeds of the spark were spent by Christine, and he didn't receive any of it. There's tons of blame shifting going on. Michael constantly blame shifts to Christine all throughout both seasons 1 and 2. During their sit-down interview, Natalia asks, why did you re-age me? Why did you adopt me? Did you know that all this abuse was going on? Why did you not stop them from treating me this way? Christine. Right after the series aired, Christine took to Facebook to give a sort of rebuttal, and it's very long. I'm not going to go over the whole thing. Christine rage typed a lot of this response out, and a lot of that rage is still directed at Natalia. She denies all the allegations of abuse against her and points out a lot of examples of Natalia's behavior. She claims that she's using sympathy to manipulate people. Christine really paints herself as a long-suffering victim in this post. She makes no mention of any of the tests that were done to confirm Natalia's actual age and still refers to Natalia as an adult living on her own. Christine says that Natalia is diagnosed as a sociopath. A sociopath isn't really a diagnosis. You can be diagnosed with sociopathy or antisocial personality disorder, but you can't diagnose a child with any personality disorder. Just spitballing some other reasons why the Barnetts might have had such a absolute, really, I'll say hatred for Natalia. If they really do have strong narcissistic traits, I'm not diagnosing them, not a doctor, but if they do, then it's common for narcissists to have a disdain for people who are disabled or sick. They view them as inconvenient. Dr. Ramani has a whole video on her channel about narcissists and sick people. In a nutshell, narcissists hate anything that reminds them of aging or frailty, the human condition. They hate thinking of illness or death because it deflates their fantasies they have of being superhuman. Narcissists pretty much live in a fantasy world. They reject reality. It kind of reminds me of that scene in American Psycho where Patrick Bateman kills a homeless man just because of how disgusted he is by him. You may have seen that popular platitude floating around out there, no pun intended. Sometimes people pretend you're a bad person so they don't feel guilty for how they treated you. Kind of a good way of looking at this. Like, the more abuse Natalia endured, the more the Barnetts seemed to hate her. So at the end of the second season, it ends on a cliffhanger like the first season did. It alludes to a conflict or drama in the man's household, that the mans are having a problem with Natalia. They say that they're done with her. It sounds like Natalia does have a lot of problems, that she's difficult to live with. It doesn't mean she's a sociopath or a criminal. Even if she does do something in the future, like to harm herself or others, that doesn't vindicate Christine's claim that she's a sociopath. Christine was her adoptive mother. She was in a position where she could have gotten Natalia actual help. So those are my thoughts on Natalia Grace. If you actually made it all the way to the end of watching this, thank you. It's a very convoluted story. I don't know how well of a job I did at telling it, but thank you.